Hello and welcome to Berkeley Viewforth. Today's thought started in the wee small hours of Monday night. I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was thinking about a ladle. Now, this might seem an unpromising start to Thought for the Day, but this is the kind of train of thought that I have in my head at 3 o'clock in the morning. So the reason I was thinking about a ladle was because earlier on Sunday evening, we were at the Pentecost prayer meeting, and I kept hearing a funny noise during the prayer meeting, and it wasn't until after the prayer meeting had finished that I realised I had left pan on the hob, and it was very burnt, and in the pan there was a burnt ladle. And when I woke up I was wondering if that could be revived or whether I would have to replace it. And of course, if I had a gas hob I would have seen the flames were still on and known to turn it off. But I have an induction hob, and so apart from occasionally hearing a noise that sounded like cooking, there was no way of knowing it was on until I noticed that it was burnt. And then, of course, I started thinking about fire, which was obviously relevant for Pentecost, thinking about the flames that came down and rested on the disciples' heads on the day of Pentecost. So I was lying in bed thinking about fire, and anybody who knows me well will know that before I was a administrator at Berkeley Viewforth Church, I did a degree in environmental management. My ecology lecturer had a PhD in fire management on upland heaths in Scotland, and I was thinking about before the pandemic, on the news we had Australia and the bushfires and the devastation that we saw across a large part of the Australian environment. There was talk about how the management of the fires in Australia had changed over the years. Historically, the Aboriginals would burn the brush under the trees, and that was a way of them managing so that they didn't have devastating fires. I also was reading a book recently which was talking about the devastating fires in the northwest Pacific area of the United States. And the reason that the fires are so bad there is because traditionally it was the ponderosa pine trees that were the predominant species. People went in and wanted lots of wood, so all those trees got removed and they were replaced with very thin, spindly trees that don't withhold fires. And the traditional trees there, they actually regenerate when there's fire. They need fire to be able to reproduce, which is the same with a lot of Australian trees. They need fire in order to produce the next generation. I started thinking about how that could be relevant when it had been Pentecost. And so I've been looking at some Bible verses. And for those kind of images where the fires are very devastating, we can look at God as a consuming fire. And in Hebrews it says, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." That phrase, God is a consuming fire, is a reference to Deuteronomy, which says, "Be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he has made with you. Do not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything the Lord your God has forbidden, for the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God." Of course, on the day of Pentecost, it wasn't a consuming fire in that context. In that context, we're thinking about the gift of the Spirit, God's Spirit as a flame. And we know that sometimes it's difficult to light a fire if you've not got the right conditions. We read in 2 Timothy, "For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." So there we have a different image of the flame, something that needs nurtured and looked after. Another thing I've been thinking about to do with fire is the fact that quite often at the moment when it's been nice weather, I've left my windows open. When I eventually went back to sleep on Monday, early hours, and woke up on Monday morning, the room was full of smoke because someone was having a bonfire. And although I found it annoying, I thought, well, what does that mean? What can I take from that? What can I learn from that? And so I was thinking about how penetrating smoke is. And maybe that's the message I want to share with you today. That if we're on fire for God, if we have the Spirit of God in us, working in us, and be setting us alight, that smoke, that invisible smoke, should be obvious to people. People should know when they're in our presence that flame of God is within us. So I hope that me being awake in the middle of the night has brought something useful to you today, and let us go forward in the spirit of Pentecost and ask God to come and fill us with His Spirit and set us on fire for Him.